What is up? My name is Blake Mitchamore. I'm here with Brian Gulish, and we are talking about Starrcade 97, what should have been the biggest match and possibly main event in wrestling history. Now, Brian, when you and I got to know each other a few years ago, we bonded over a lot of things, but one of the things we bonded over was that we were both WCW guys. We both were Sting fans. I know for me, when I was a teenager, I went through a period that I didn't watch wrestling, and this angle, Sting and Hogan leading up to this match, was a big reason why I got back into wrestling. So I was all over it, and then it should have been so much more than it was.
Not the angle itself. The end result should have been so much more.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about, without even watching this stuff, I can remember the angle itself. Obviously, where it started, fake Sting coming out of the limo, War Games 96, the promo that you mentioned so many times on Twitter, nothing's for sure about Sting, when he first shows up in the crow face paint. There were so many moments to this angle, starting from the end of September of 96, September of 97. I mean, to this day, there is nothing in wrestling, and we're going to get into 83 weeks in depth here, but there was nothing in wrestling to this day that matches this angle.
No, I mean, there were parts of the angle along the way that first of all, Jeff Farmer, I don't care. Yeah, he has the same build, but just everything about him was just generic. Yes, I get that's the point. It's supposed to be a generic Sting, but I could have got in the ring and had better mannerisms that mimicked the real Sting than Jeff Farmer. I mean, everything from his Stinger splash to, actually the only thing he really did good was the Scorpion Deathlock. But, I mean, he would howl and beat his chest way too much. Sting didn't do it as much as he did, Jeff Farmer did. So to that point, I get that, but I think that was overused in the entire angle. But just from start to finish, when Sting declared himself a free agent to the time that he first came out wearing black and white, and you could see the character itself evolve over the 18 months from him wearing a WCW Nitro shirt reversed inside out. You could see that there was still something on that shirt. They never had a straight all black shirt. They would always have him just turn a black shirt with something on inside out. The face paint evolved from just a couple black lines here to where it evolved to. Obviously, the hair grew out over time. But as you got into the middle part of 1997 and towards the end of 1997, that's really the last 6 months of the feud is really what made it a great angle. I mean, there were the DDP angles and the Savage part of the angles where they weren't going to leave the ring and they were going to stay in the ring, and then they walk with Sting. The Steiners in the beginning, that was a very intriguing part of the angle. Rick Steiner hit Sting from behind, and he gave him the bat, and Scott pulled Rick off. But to build that idea to the WCW talent at the time that he was loyal to WCW, I like that, and it kind of peaked and valleyed until the final 6 months when you were just exponentially growing into what should have been the ultimate of ultimate payoff.
And that's what I mean, and I agree. I mean, I can sit here right now. We're talking about an angle that finished just a little bit under 21 years ago, and I can recall moments of it without even watching. The Rick Steiner bat moment you just mentioned. Uncensored 97, where he cleared the ring after they won that three-way team match. All the moments with J.J. Dillon trying to get him to fight Scott Hall or whoever in the NWO, and he would just rip up the contract. And then the final one where the crowd's chanting Hogan and he points to the bat with a Hogan sign. I can recall those moments without watching them 21 years later. This should have been the best moment arguably in wrestling history.
Well, honestly, in the build-up, I think the best Sting run-in, he did all the saves. He saved DDP, and they went back up into the rafters. The the mummy falling through the ring and then Sting reattaching under the ring. But my favorite actual Sting saving the day moment was the Sting Army. You had 15 Stings come out of the crowd, and then you have 3 Stings walking down the ramp, and Buff hits one, or Buff goes to hit the one Sting, and that actually ends up being the real Sting. But yeah, I mean, the build up to the match, especially the last 3 to 6 months, which was there, it was booked so well. You just have to wonder, how could somebody drop the ball in the main event the way they did?
Well, we're going to get into why Eric Bischoff says they dropped the ball. So let's talk about the match for a minute. I rewatched it yesterday for the first time in, I don't know, a few years at least. I forgot just how bad this match really is. And Sting was a pretty good worker back in his prime, back in this time. But, I mean, it just reminded me of, at this period of his career, Hogan couldn't do anything in the ring. This match feels like nothing was.
Hogan never could do anything. That's the point. I went back and watched a lot of Hogan matches in the past year. It seems like out of nowhere, this debate has come up about Starrcade 97, not just on the 83 Weeks podcast, but on Ric Flair's podcast a couple of years ago. The talk has always been there. And if you think about it throughout the years, aside from some punches and some back rakes, I mean, to me, Hogan's best match ever, aside from the aura of the Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, was Rock and Hogan at WrestleMania in Toronto. I think that was really in Hogan's older age, I think, and again, it was the crowd, it was The Rock himself. But going into the match, you knew you weren't going to get much from Hogan in the bout against Sting. I mean, Sting would have to carry Hogan if booked properly, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not even talking from that standpoint. I mean, if you go, but like you said, there's nothing in this match. There is literally, it's 12 minutes long. Yeah,
it was 18 months of build for a 12 or 13 minute payoff, and that includes after the fast count, slow count, restart. That all is included in there. 13 minutes for all of that.
So when I rewatched it, and you and I were texting about it, the first thing that stood out to me was the entrance. The entrance was botched from the beginning. There is a period when Sting's music hits that it cuts off completely for 2 to 3 seconds.
Well, no, it doesn't. We were talking about that. I went back and watched it. It's there's a hum. It's okay. The set. They did the whole laser show, the lightning, and it kind of like you hear the boom, and then it gets right into the theme. But this is much talked about, not only before in the day of the match, 1 p.m. on, about Sting's mentality from Eric Bischoff's perspective in the locker room, but the entrance didn't bother me. We can talk about the tan, we can talk about the entrance. The guy was a dark character who he was a loner. So him walking in the ring slowly, it made sense.
I disagree with you there. I think looking back at it, watching this entrance again, it bothers me from 2 aspects. One, I agree with Conrad on the show. Why didn't they just let him rappel down from the ring again, or rappel down from the rafters? You could have done something. I mean, think about this if this was a WWE angle. I mean, there was a match in '96 where Undertaker rappelled very slowly down, from the rafters. You could have done some elaborate. Didn't have to be the fast just drop from the ceiling like he normally did. You could have done some elaborate entrance from that. He didn't need to come out like a regular competitor. And then the other thing that stands out to me, and this is where I'll start to tie in 83 Weeks. Conrad mentioned Dave Meltzer saying that when he walked out, the aura was gone. And I agree. It is.
But I don't want to see now. This is where I'll agree with Bischoff.
Let me finish where I'm going. I agree with it is. I mean, I mentioned to you, he walks out with his coat draped off his shoulder. It looks half-assed. It looks like he doesn't give a crap. But I think at that point he didn't, because he knew that they had already jacked up the moment and that it wasn't going to be what it was supposed to be. I think he didn't give a crap about the match anymore because he knew Hogan and Bischoff had played politics and came up with this convoluted, jacked up finish to ruin what should have been the greatest day in this company's history.
Well, first things first, when Hogan gets in the ring, first, obviously, because the whole Bischoff Zbyszko match before, Hogan coming out by himself, I liked it a lot. He didn't need Bischoff. He didn't need anybody else. Kevin Nash has stated it should have been in a cage because then it would have really been one-on-one. I don't really agree with that, but
I don't like that I mean, it's like if you had a cage match in a WrestleMania main event.
But when Hogan gets in the ring, they show him prior to Sting coming out talking to Nick Patrick. Yeah, he does a little, I don't know what was said there, but right there, it just didn't feel right. Why is he talking to Nick Patrick? Right. And then Sting comes to the ring. I think the slow entrance was fine because they made up for it with the way that they were doing the video. They showed a kind of like a 50-50 delusion to where Hogan's standing there on the top turnbuckle looking down at Sting coming to the ring. You had both faces. That was really good. You showed them. You didn't have to stare at them. You showed them coming to the ring together, and then Sting gets in the ring, and we have the official in the face. And real quick before we finish about this entrance, because it doesn't need to be talked about anymore, I was never a fan of Michael Buffer. Just me.
I can take it or leave it. Now, I will agree with you on the end of it. I don't like the beginning of it. Rewatching it yesterday, the ending of it is great. Sting stopping in the aisle, the face-off, the delusion of the camera angle like you're talking about. That part of it was great. So they do save it toward the end.
I mean, I give the entrance an 8 out of 10. There. It's not bad. It's not great. I give it 8.
We'll disagree there. But now let's get the bulk of this podcast. So Eric Bischoff's contention was Sting showed up to the building.
And he was pale white.
And there you go. And if you go, he's not even that pale, dude. Yes, he's not. Anybody's pale compared to freaking Hogan back in that day, even now. But he's not.
But here's what I don't understand about here. I just got to get this off now. Here's what I don't understand about Eric Bischoff's reasoning for this. The guy hung out in the rafters. He was the pro. He wore black trench coats. When the hell is he supposed to tan? You wouldn't think he would be tanning. He's supposed to be pale, just like the. See, my dogs are even pissed off about it. When's he going to go out and tan? He's supposed to be this mysterious, dark, black and white character. So who cares if he had white arms? And they said the same thing at WrestleMania with Triple H and him, that he didn't even tan. Now, that's another thing for another story for a different day.
Well, that wouldn't look bad because he wore the singlet where his chest was shown. But
why does he need to be tan? It was just his arms. He doesn't need to be tan. He's black and white.
Well, and I agree with you. I agree with you in that because it would have looked – and I thought this rewatching the match. That pale white face paint, if he'd have had Hulk Hogan, red, brown arms, it would have looked stupid. It would have looked dumb to the character. And
not to mention, maybe if Hogan laid off the tanning bed a little bit, Sting would have looked a little bit darker than he was.
He wasn't, but he wasn't that pale. I mean,
he wasn't. Just like he wasn't small. His arms were still huge. He might have not been jacked like he was when he was wrestling 360 days a year or 290 days a year or whatever it was a year. But Sting,
that all goes to the character. That character was a guy who withdrew into himself because he was WCW and he saw it being, even though it's ridiculous, like the opening of that. The opening of the show mentions an empire torn down. That was the whole premise of that character. And so obviously he wasn't going to do the same things he did. I mean, it wasn't that was just a cop-out. I don't know what the motivation was. I mean, now I have heard, and the other thing I disagree in this is Eric Bischoff says that Sting has came out and admitted the same things, and that's not true. If you watch that Into the Light documentary that WWE did, he doesn't say, oh, I wasn't in the right frame of mind or anything like that. I'm not saying he wasn't, but I just don't know what the real motivation behind this was because there's no reason for what they did. No reason for it. If you go back and look at this finish, you have what was supposed to be a fast count absolutely botched. The Montreal Screwjob ripoff.
Well, that's another thing too. If they had 18 months in the making for this angle and you knew what the payoff was going to be, why are they just booking the finish at 1 p.m. the day of the event? This should have been planned a month ago, 2 weeks ago, a week ago, anything more than 10 hours before the actual payoff. It made absolutely zero sense. And for Bischoff to say that that fast count wasn't supposed to be there, why would Bret Hart be where he was at the time? Don't even get me into the Buff Bagwell, Scott Norton part at the end of this match, because they each took one small punch and mysteriously were just decapitated and put back to finish, you know, what they were coming out there for. Just from start to finish, it was all BS. Eric Bischoff had 18 months to book a finish, whether it was him or Kevin Sullivan and Hogan and Sting and whoever was involved in that match. It just, none of it adds up. None of it adds up.
And the other thing, I'll call bull crap on the fact that Eric says that he wasn't involved in the finishes at that point. Maybe not all of them, maybe not Nitro or Uncensored, but
he was definitely involved in that match's finish, because okay, even if it's Kevin Sullivan, you don't think Bischoff's involved with the guy he just brought in less than a month ago to be involved in the finish of the biggest main event in WCW history?
Well, just from that fact alone, the fact that this was the biggest show in that company's history, and at this point in time, in '97, was by far the biggest thing that had ever been done. I'll say it. People watch this, they may disagree. Was by far the biggest angle in wrestling history, because this is when WCW was at the height of its power.
Well, there's so many other little intricacies into this match that don't make sense, right? So if you have the NWO coming out and Sting's fighting for WCW, and at this point we know Sting's on Team WCW for 99.9% assurance. I go back to Great American Bash 1990 when the dudes with attitudes were there to stop the Horsemen from coming to the ring and interfering in the Ric Flair Sting Championship match. So instead of having 35 WCW superstars in the ring 5 seconds after Sting wins the title at the end of this whole debacle, where were they to stop two guys from the NWO coming down during the match? Why wouldn't Luger or Giant or DDP or whoever, why wouldn't they be there to stop the potential? Just none of it made sense. Not one thing in this match made sense, except for Sting winning the title. But again, even following this match, you go to the Nitro after, and then you go to Super Brawl 1998. I watched the Super Brawl match, which was 100 times better than the Starrcade match. But even the Super Brawl match where Sting was going to go over clean, when the NWO hit the ring, why did Sting end up getting the win? Because Savage comes in with a paint can and clocks Hogan and knocks him out, and Sting gets the win that way. Again, Hulk Hogan, and that's how I keep adding up the points. And I look at WrestleMania between Hogan and Ultimate Warrior, where at the 3 count, Hogan's trying to kick out. Like, dude, for once, just lose cleanly. Just lose. Aside from The Rock being him clean, to that point, if you look at his entire career, when Hogan were to lose, he's always finding a way to make himself look strong, whether it's the screw job at Starrcade or whatever you want to call it, the goofy finish there, the Savage coming in and knocking him out so Sting can't get a clean victory over him at Super Brawl, going back to the Hogan Warrior match. There was never a time when Hulk Hogan was never into business for himself. He was a great politician. He was a great man of words. In ring, you know, there's the debate, who's the Mount Rushmore professional wrestling? You know, who was better superstar? Was it Ric Flair or was it Hulk Hogan? Well, if you take it all together, Ric Flair never sold as much merch as Hulk Hogan, but Ric Flair wasn't in WWF at the time, and the time that Vince McMahon was blowing up the world of sports entertainment. If Ric Flair had been with WWF in the 80s and the 90s, when that was the hottest time of growth in professional wrestling, Ric Flair might be known as the greatest wrestler of all time. I'm not discounting the 16 world titles and everything he's done, but as far as a persona, Hulk Hogan is unquestionably the biggest persona in the history of wrestling.
No, and I agree with that. Here's what,
he couldn't wrestle a match to save his life.
No, I mean, he threw a couple of decent ones when he was led by people. I mean, I think the Ultimate Warrior match is a very entertaining match, but he was in his mid to late 30s at that point.
But even that match, there was a
no, he ruined the finish. I agree. The finish is ruined in that too, because he kicks out and doesn't lay there and go over clean.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's more, but the only one I can think of that a major moment like that was the Rock match was the only one, and that was because he was in his early 50s at that point, and Vince probably told him, this is what's happening if you want to keep working here. But
I just, at the end of the day, this should have never got to where they were in a room together, Hulk, Sting, and Bischoff, 8 hours before the pay-per-view, 8, 9, whatever it was before the main event match, and they're just trying to figure out, and then Sting leaves, and Hogan and Bischoff look at each other and go, this ain't happening. Like, it makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. It should have been however you wanted to book the match. Sting comes down, Hogan gets the upper hand. However, even if the NWO did come in, Sting fights them off. Hogan powers in the corner. If Hogan didn't want to submit or tap out to the Scorpion Death Lock, let it just be a simple Scorpion Death drop, pin, 1, 2, 3, end of story. That's how it should have been. And again, it was getting to that point. The structure of the match at Super Brawl was the same pretty much. They were in the ring. Sting charged the ring. Hogan whips Sting with the belt. They go outside. They brawl outside for a little bit because they're not going to have any actual wrestling moves in the ring. They get back in the ring. Hogan does everything. Sting comes back. He essentially stings up, for lack of a better term, and he Scorpion Death drops Hogan after 2 Stinger splashes, and then here comes the NWO. It fights him off, and it was the perfect finish coming because he could have just finished off Hogan, but no, Savage had to come down, hit Hogan with the paint can. So that ruined that match.
Yeah,
but
I need to go back and watch that match.
100 times better than the actual Starrcade match. So it's what we're supposed to be talking about here, but it just shows you how bad that the Starrcade match was when you can talk about a match 2 months later that was 100 times better.
Well, and I want to that Super Bowl match. So I think let's say everything that Bischoff said was true. Him and Hogan, Sting walked in. He was out of it. He wasn't the same guy, whatever. He had stuff going on in his personal life. He wasn't into it. And they felt like, okay, this is not – you still don't mess up this match.
Yeah, you could take the belt off of him a night later, a month.
And I tweeted this to Conrad. In my opinion, you have a quick match. Like you can mimic all the same angle, the angle the whole way through. He can beat the crap out of Hogan in 3 minutes and drop him with a death drop and be over it. The crowd still goes crazy because they're waiting for Sting to win. And then let's say he's out of it. Let's say he's not the guy. He can't. You've decided, you know what? Sting's not into this. Something's going on. He can't carry the ball. Why not pivot in February at Super Bowl at that point and put it back at Hogan? Then you still have the moment at Starrcade. It's still the biggest moment in wrestling history instead of this convoluted mashup that is ridiculous. It was not about Sting not being his head not being in the game. It was
politics. It was politics. And Bischoff says Hogan doesn't make any more money as champ or not champ. He has his contract. He's guaranteed what he was guaranteed. But it just the politics part of it is Hogan think if he loses here, he's done. No, he's not done, because then you would have had your rematch clause anyway. You would have had a rematch at Super Brawl. And even if Sting gets over there or some screwy finish where the NWO screws over Sting, I mean, just it was downhill from there. That was the, you know, people talk about the finger poke of doom. This is where WC, this is the beginning of the downfall of it. And I think when, you know, we both used to do some stuff for Chair Shot Reality, I think I wrote a blog on that site at one point and said that this is the beginning of the end. You go back to the following night on Nitro, they have another match and they go off the air before the finish happens. They hold the belt up. They go into Super Bowl, and then 98 is where it all tails off and goes just downhill. And then 99, 2000, Vince Russo's there. 2000, like Conrad said on the podcast down in Atlanta, Goldberg beats Hogan clean. There you go. There's a clean victory. Jackhammer. 6 months later. Yeah, spear, jackhammer, done. And he wins. And the place goes nuts. They give it away for free. The reaction was awesome. That's how Sting should have been. Absolutely. Goldberg got the Sting payoff at the end of the day. Now, let me ask you this. I mean, I think we both agree this was the beginning of the end of WCW. If they do this right and they don't botch it, it's hard to say 20 years later, but do you think WCW lasts much longer than 2001? No, because it's still, you got to look at it from an economic standpoint. If all the rumors or whatever is out there is true, and WCW was actually losing money on the NWO merchandise because everyone was getting their cut and Hogan's taking his cut. Economically, financially didn't add up. And just the NWO was so diluted by that point anyways.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff to the outsiders, Hogan, bring in X-Pac. It should have been all WWE guys. There should have not been one WCW, maybe one or two that could have crossed over, like the Giant. Like there's a picture of Giant, the outsiders, Hogan, and DiBiase. Now you can throw in Virgil there, Vincent, whatever you want to call him, bring in X-Pac. It should have just been those guys, Savage, who were with WWE. Right. That should have been your NWO. And speaking of WWE, the person who laughed loudest at the result of Starrcade 97 was Vince McMahon, because not only did his screw job screw over Brett, then they had this idea to do the stupid same idea at Starrcade that screwed up the biggest finish to the biggest angle of all time. So Vince is saying, how could you mess this up, WCW? Vince was probably sitting there laughing.
And that's something. Do you think, Bischoff mentions in this podcast a couple times that, he mentions in his own match at Starrcade that he wanted to make sure he, took his match serious so that, Brett didn't look dumb, and that he made Brett come out looking strong at the end of this. Is there any of this that was do you think any of the motivation was to make Brett almost take the place of Sting by
that
moment at the end where he's the new savior of WCW?
That makes perfect sense because, first of all, the same move, right? They were same stature, Sting had the neon colors in his early days in WCW before he transitioned to the Crow. Bret Hart was that hot pink and black, and that flash with the fans with the glasses, and when he was a face in WWF. So it makes sense, because you bring in a guy for whatever he signed for, $3 million or whatever it was per year. You're not going to just let him be second fiddle, be just U.S. champion. You would think you would set up a match with whether it would be Brett and Sting or whether it would be Brett and Hogan or maybe a triple threat match. There's so much that they could have done with it. But again, there was no plan. It was just, hey, we're signing Bret Hart. That's it. We got him signed. He's under contract. He's ours now. We're going to get more eyes from WWF who are pissed off that Bret got screwed, so they're going to watch our product now. It's just way too much overthinking. The best acronym ever, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. That's all Bischoff had to do was keep it simple. And he tried to get too complex with this thing. Again, at the end of the day, he's executive producer. He is creative director. He is the president of WCW. He should have been the one that had the final call. Not Hulk Hogan, not Sting, not any of the bookers, no one. It'd be the similar thing with Vince McMahon today. Triple H could have run NXT brilliantly. But at the end of the day, who's got the final call? Vince McMahon. The only person above Eric Bischoff would have been Ted Turner. And since he knew nothing about wrestling, it all came back to Bischoff. So at the end of the day, that's what we got to say. Eric Bischoff, you can make any excuse you want. Tan, out of shape, not into it, confusion, miscommunications. You were the boss.
Right. I agree. And that's all that was in that podcast. It was just excuses of why he knew. And if you listen to 83 Weeks, he does this anytime he knows he's walking into something. He has a bullshit excuse. I'm ready to go. He has, and this is all that was, because there is no defense to this. This is the biggest screw up in wrestling history. Now, there were two things one that was mentioned this that I never knew and never even thought. Conrad briefly mentions that at this moment, WCW had just really started with merch when the NWO exploded, that Sting was selling the most merchandise of anybody, even.
Think of those masks. You sell those masks for $20 a pop. Everyone was buying those masks for themselves, for their kids. You had the Scorpion shirt. You had the face shirt, the Crow face shirts. At some point, no matter how cool the NWO was, there's more fans who, especially the young fans, who are Sting fans. So they're going to back Sting. And it makes that much sense. So it makes sense that he was selling the most merch.
And then the last thing for me is something that I will give Eric Bischoff credit and WCW credit in this. We've never seen an angle like this in WWE. Not something that's gone a year and a half.
Well, you've had if you look at overall, you got Austin and McMahon. That was
but not 16 months and not 18 months that leaded to one.
When the guy doesn't have to wrestle for a year and he just comes out of the rafters or he comes down from the ceiling or wherever he comes from under the ring even a couple times. It was they kept it simple that way. It was NWO storms the ring, attacks whoever it might be, Piper or Flair or DDP or Savage or whoever it is. Before Savage joined, Sting comes down, makes the save. Sting comes out of the crowd, makes the save. But one final point I want to make though, but if you listen to the podcast, Bischoff even acknowledges how terrible the Go Home Nitro was.
Yeah.
That was when they were taking over, and it was now an NWO Monday Nitro, and they had the 15-minute segment where they're changing over the set. And
I just rewatched that. It is bad.
Hogan get all these gifts, and the head in the box thing at the end, and Bret Hart comes out, and then Sting comes down on a zip cord, and it was stupid.
Yeah.
If anything, that's the time you have Sting get beat down by the NWO, and is he going to be able to make it to Starrcade? Join us Sunday night on pay-per-view.
Well, and that's where I was going with the WWE comment is watching this in preparation to do this with you, and then just out of curiosity, but after listening to this show on Monday, is what would this angle have been? What would this match have been if they were both working for Vince at the time and not WWE?
Well, it would have been a WrestleMania match, and it would.
I think it would have, conceivably headlined WrestleMania 14 over Austin and Michaels that year.
I don't know about that. Well,
that's the Mania it would have gone to. Yeah,
but at the time, again, it could have. The initial end point for this angle was long before Starrcade.
Yeah, they said it was supposed to end in February at 97.
Yeah, so it was Super Brawl '97. But
I guess it would have been WrestleMania 13, which that was horrible.
But so for as much momentum as there was, the money that they were making, the ratings were just popping off. Why is the podcast called 83 Weeks? Because those are the 83 weeks where WCW won the Monday Night Wars. Why did they win the Monday Night Wars? This feud.
Yep. It just should have been so much better. Could have been so much better. And, I thoroughly enjoy 83 Weeks. I listen to it every week. But
if the WWE wants, they still can capitalize on this thing. Do a network special. Starrcade 97. Hogan's back with the company now. Sting does his Legends deal. Have the three. Do a table for three with Bischoff, Hogan, and Sting. Or just do a 1 hour special on that match, because controversy creates cash. So just think about that. Would be the highest watched, most watched WWE network show of all time. I guarantee you, if WCW or WWE would just come together and put something like that together, it would you could add interviews with the outsiders, because everyone's got a shoot interview somewhere on YouTube talking about this finish. So bring in your bookers from that time in WCW. Bring in the NWO guys. Bring in a couple WCW guys, people that were in the know to talk about, hey, we got the Montreal Screwjob talked about. Why can't we talk about Starrcade 97? I think Vince is totally missing out on a huge opportunity there.
Well, let me ask you, in vein of that idea, do you think with as good of a guy as, and I don't know him personally, obviously, but as good of a guy as it appears that Sting is, and you hear everybody talk about, do you think Sting would really feed into that and really dive into?
Well, I think he would, because it would end the story once and for all. It would put all the questions to rest. We get the truth. If Bischoff sticks to his story and Hogan sticks to his and Sting sticks to his, and nothing new comes out of it, fine. But at least try to get, have current wrestlers say, hey, when I was growing up, I watched this. Like, I'm thinking, this doesn't make sense. Hey, listen, I know there's a love-hate there with WWE and Dave Meltzer, but have Dave Meltzer on to discuss it. Have the guys, they have a huge opportunity here. I don't know. If I'm working for the WWE Network, if I'm in WWE, I'm saying we have to do this. It makes too much sense. Well, again, whether it's just a simple table for three or if it's a more in-depth 1 hour documentary,
I see. I wouldn't want a table for three. It has to be there.
Oh, yeah, it has to be a lot longer. It has to be an hour documentary, but
yeah, table for three wouldn't get it done.
No, it wouldn't. But you could still do a table of three off of it too, with just the three of them.
Right.
Don't have to talk anything. Table of three could be a preview. Do like a 25-minute preview on table of three where they talk about just the angle and how hot it was, but you don't have to talk about the documentary. Would be night up. They give a 5 or 10-minute background, build up, preface of what they're going to talk about, but the final 45 minutes is just that match.
I agree, man. It should have been so much more. Could still be so much more to this day. I hadn't thought about the programming they could do right now, like you just mentioned. It's a fantastic idea and something that, just like this podcast, when I saw that Starrcade 97 was the topic, I mean, I work at night, so the minute it downloaded on my phone, I started listening to it, and I have listened to at least the finish of it, even though I think everything that Eric Bischoff said was absolute bullshit. 3 times. I've watched Starrcade 97 now, the event twice, and the WWE could make so much money off of this right now, just based off of the buzz that you see on the internet and on social media of Eric Bischoff's comments on this show.
Yep.
It's all the thoughts, man.
No, I just think that at the end of the day, it's gonna be one of those things. If you put top 10 wrestling moments in history, whether it's controversial moments or great matches or great events, this is in it. This is in it with the screw job. This is in it with, you could have Austin McMahon feud over the years. You could have. There's so many things. Just the Attitude Era could be a top 10 moment. We're not just talking matches or. Like if you took the top 10, this is definitely in it, because aside from Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen, this was in the Monday Night Wars. This is what WCW is known for: Sting versus Hogan.
Well, I disagree.
What are you known for then?
Well, no, I mean I'm not. Well, okay. If
I'm thinking WCW, what do I think of? I think of Sting Hogan, which would just.
I think of Hogan Bash at the Beach before I think of this.
Well, the turn led to the angle, so it's all together.
Okay, fair enough, but I'm just saying, if you ask me WCW, that's the first thing that's popping in my mind.
All together. The NWO, Sting, Hogan, that's all together. Then I think of Sting and Ric Flair. Then I think of the Final Nitro. There's a lot, but at the end of the day, I don't know.
I just can't believe you mentioned the dudes with attitudes earlier. Still. That popped me out.
You're a Sting fan, you remember these things.
I was laughing for 2 minutes in the background while you were still talking at that. So, all right, final question before we get off this here today. If this was done right, and try to separate yourself from Sting fandom and just look at it objectively if you can. If this was done correctly, is this a top 5 moment in wrestling history?
Yeah, absolutely. Sting conquers the NWO. If you want to put Hogan Andre, okay, there's one. If you want to, this has to be. I mean, Austin Rock at a point.
I think even though the match wasn't that good, I think you maybe just as the jump off point to his reign, Austin. Winning at 14.
Hey, well, King of the Ring, Austin, that's a huge moment, the Austin speech itself. But, I mean, Brock Lesnar beating Undertaker to end the streak, there's a moment.
Right.
First, it was a WrestleMania. I mean, WrestleMania 30 was great. We were there. We watched it together. But
right.
Daniel Bryan's story itself, overcoming all odds, defeating Triple H and then defeating Batista and Randy Orton. But that's not, I don't think, a top 5 moment of all time. But, again, look back in the 80s, too. You go further back. It's a lot of people our age talk about wrestling in the very late 80s till now, the 90s, the WrestleMania era in general. But most people, when they talk WrestleMania, they start with WrestleMania 3. So,
no, I mean, I agree. Sitting here thinking while you were talking, I can't think of any that stand out. And I think that is the legacy of this event, this moment, and this screw up is what WCW could have. I mean, yes, the NWO being formed in that run, but this should have been the bell cow moment, if you will, for WCW, and instead, it's just an afterthought, and it's thought of, like Conrad mentioned, and like you and I just talked about. This was the beginning of the downfall of WCW. They never. Yes, they drew high ratings through the beginning of '98, and it didn't really start to fall off ratings-wise, even though WWE was beating them until '99. They were still drawing high ratings. But
yeah.
downfall started.
Yes, and I also say if you finish this match off right, Sting doesn't go Wolfpack, or at least not as soon does he go Wolfpack. Sting stays Sting. He carries the WCW banner, and then maybe, just maybe, when WWE purchases WCW, if they would have purchased it, because again, the outcome of this match could have changed a lot of things looking towards 2000 and 2001. Could Sting have went to WWE earlier? It's just the what ifs.
See, I you mentioned it earlier. You said you still think they closed in 2001. I'm not going to say they're open today, but I don't think they closed in 2001. I think if this goes right and they execute it properly, Bischoff stays in power longer. He doesn't get bounced in 90, which means, we both have had interactions with him personally, but Russo doesn't come in. That whole era of back and forth doesn't happen. I think you see the Monday Night Wars happen for longer. The Monday Night Wars may go into early to mid 2000s, which means the greatest era in wrestling continues, and we're not in the place we are now. I just think that and it's hard to predict that. But in my opinion, I think if this was done correctly, it changes the trajectory of WCW for many years after.
I think the dog, you're telling me it's time to wrap up the show.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it enough. Your dogs are going crazy. It's been fun chatting about it. Starrcade '97 should have been so much more than it was.
Thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Yes, sir.